Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
If Justin Bieber spits on me, will I go viral?
Answer me this, answer me this.
When will they stop profiting from his downward spiral?
Answer me this. Helen and Ollie, answer me this.
We start this week's episode with one of our listeners exposing himself. Super. It's Paul, who is 34, and he's from Manchester, so if you're a listener in Manchester, keep your eyes open for Paul's undercarriage. He says, I recently moved into a flat in the city centre. It's got massive windows, and is directly overlooked by similar flats on the opposite side of the road. In the past few weeks of extreme heat, as I have no air conditioning, I've been cooling myself by opening all the windows and wearing as little as possible.
Oh yeah.
I'm fairly sure, says Paul, that my neighbours and possibly some of the people on the street below have had an unrequested eyeful as I've gone about my normal business.
Do you think he means the full meat and two veg, or does he just talk about his belly?
I'm assuming the full thing, because otherwise, what would he have to worry about? Ollie, answer me this. Despite being on private property, as I'm in public view, am I breaching indecent exposure laws? My belief is that I'm fine, so long as I'm not doing anything lewd, but I'm not sure.
Well, actually, the issue about whether or not you're on your own property is irrelevant. It is possible to get done for indecent exposure if you are exposing yourself in a way that is intended to shock the recipient of this image, regardless of where you're standing.
Yes, but what if he doesn't intend to shock? He's only trying to cool his scrotum in the breeze by the window.
Well, this is where I think a lawyer would be able to argue that indeed your intent was not to shock, your intent was merely to aerate your testes, and therefore it wasn't a deliberate act. But you may have now made things worse by putting this in writing to us, because you've confessed. You're aware that from time to time people might be seeing it. Now, why aren't you taking precautions against that? You're aware that some people may find it shocking. I think another very clever lawyer acting against you might be able to argue that therefore you are maybe not intending to do it, but you're aware of the consequences and doing it anyway.
Wear an apron, Paul. That's the obvious solution.
Answer me this, podcast.com/superstore.
My dad's got one of those aprons, Ollie. Why must you ruin it?
Stripping naked and wearing an apron totally defeats the objective of cooling your balls. They have a lovely cool bottom, but your balls will be quite hot.
So is the issue that you might be on your private property, but you're visible to people on public property?
Yes, yeah. And depending on who those people are as well, the offence can get very serious. If, for example, it's a bus stop and there's a load of school children there.
Yeah, or a nunnery.
Then it gets you into all sorts of bother.
Yeah.
And I know the laws in America and actually in each different state of America are different to the UK, but there was a guy who the case went all the way to court in Virginia a couple of years ago, and he did get acquitted. He did successfully argue that he hadn't intended it, but in his case it was that a woman, and then separately later that day a woman and her child, had seen him completely stark bollock naked. And essentially what he was able to argue was he hadn't seen them. They'd seen him, but he hadn't made eye contact at the child. But it could have come down to that. Like, he wouldn't have had to have been touching himself, wouldn't have had to be anything more inappropriate than him being naked, but if he'd have made eye contact with the child, he could have gone to prison for 2 years.
And where was he? In his house?
In his house in Virginia, yeah.
And they were peering in through the window like perverts?
No, they were standing on the street corner, and he says he was just walking around to, much as Paul does, to get a summer breeze.
It is warm.
I think if you live in a flat with street-level windows, then
you're asking for it.
Yeah, I think you've got to behave in a slightly more responsible manner, Paul. I think if you're 3 stories up and someone's just got a brief flash from I was going to say bird's eye perspective there. What's the equivalent of something that's underneath? Like
Worm's
a rat's
eye
perspective?
Rat's eye. Rat's eye of your Jap's eye.
If someone's got a rat's eye of your Jap's eye, then I think if it's brief and fleeting, that is permissible.
It's Peter Flynn from Palmerston, Northern New Zealand. Helen Lolly and Martin Salmon, answer me this. Why are straitjackets called straitjackets? They're not particularly straight, nor do they even keep your arms straight.
Am I right in saying it's spelt differently to straight, keeping you straight?
You picked the wrong straight
It's like Straits of Gibraltar.
Yeah,
straight.
or straight as in straightened circumstances.
So what's the difference in definition for people who don't know?
Well, straight meant a narrow, confined place, or to be bound and drawn tight, which is what a straitjacket does. All of those things.
S-T-R-A-I-T.
Yes, and also it means a sense of difficulty, but that's kind of afterwards, because if you're in a narrow place or being bound and tight, then You would be in difficulty, wouldn't you?
Hence dire straits.
Yeah, precisely.
Ah, yeah.
Whereas straight as in the straight and narrow, or as in a straight edge, that's from the Middle English to stretch.
So a helpful way to remember the difference might be to think of Mark Knopfler in a straitjacket.
The first straitjacket was invented by an upholsterer in France in 1790.
Was it designed to restrain people?
I assume so, because what else is it going to be for? Do you think maybe the upholsterer was trying to make a stretchy seat cover and it just went really wrong? They thought, oh, what can I do with this? Great age for inventions in France, straitjacket and the guillotine. And I suppose if you've got a person in a straitjacket, it's a lot easier to put them in a guillotine without them thrashing around.
They're really complementary inventions.
Yeah, people who bought this also liked. Here's a question from Phil from Chesham, who says, whilst at Alton Towers earlier today, I was buying some horrible overpriced fast food when my vegetarian girlfriend asked me what type of pork is in hamburgers. I initially scorned her for asking such a stupid question.
Quite right, Phil.
And informed her that they were made of beef, before realising that her question was actually completely logical.
Not really.
And I may have overreacted in my belittling of her, since they are called hamburgers, after all.
Let's not take the first syllable of every word and assume that that dictates the contents of the food stuff.
Frankfurters aren't made from people called Francis.
So, Helen, answer me this. Why are hamburgers called hamburgers when they don't actually contain ham? Is it because they did contain ham at one stage?
No.
Because they're from Hamburg.
Minced beef, when it came to America, was an invention popularised in Hamburg, known as a Hamburg steak. And then, around the end of the 19th, turn of the 20th century, it was then made into the Hamburg steak sandwich, which, of course, became the modern
Hamburger. Yes.
Hamburg was an international port, one of Europe's biggest international ports, which means you got people coming in with their exotic minced foods, and then Hamburg got to disseminate them elsewhere. So who knows what other foodstuffs Hamburg could have given its name to.
Hamburg, yeah.
Yeah.
Or indeed, I wonder whether Hamburg itself celebrates the hamburger now.
I don't reckon they do.
I mean, it's very much seen as an American thing, isn't it?
Yeah. In fact, I remember in the bell jar, and this is an odd thing to remember out of the bell jar, where she talks about eating raw Hamburg with an egg in it. And at the time I didn't know what raw Hamburg was, so I thought probably this is all right, but actually...
Least of her problems, though, wasn't it?
Exactly. I mean, a bit of food poisoning is just a bit of light relief compared to the suicidal depression.
She didn't want to get near to the oven.
I've got a question. Email your question to answer me this podcast at googlemail.com. To answer me this podcast at googlemail.com. To answer me this podcast at googlemail.com. To answer me this podcast at googlemail.com.
It's a question. So, retrospectors, what historical events are we ticking off on this week's run of Today in History?
On Monday, the anniversary of the day Ozzy Osbourne and a bat came face to face on stage.
On Tuesday, we go back to the future with a potted history of the DeLorean.
On Wednesday, why is the Pope guarded by those guys in floofy hats?
On Thursday, how the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ended up in Cleveland.
And on Friday, was Henry VIII really an asshole, or was it just the result of a jousting accident?
We discuss this and more on Today in History with the Retrospectors. 10 minutes each weekday, wherever you get your podcasts. Question from Louis. I liked it, Simon. Who says, Journey South are the next big thing.
Yeah, it could still happen.
Helen, answer me this. Why is the giant of online retail, Amazon, called Amazon? Is Amazon's warehouse in tropical Milton Keynes solely run by 6'5" warrior women?
With one boob.
What?
Well, the Amazons mythologically cut off one boob to make them better at archery, although they...
Did they?
Well, no, because there's no evidence of this happening.
Okay.
Apparently there's false etymology, actually, because they thought Amazon meant someone without a boob.
But how would it help you with archery? Just somewhere to put the bow?
Yeah, a horrific scar in which to dig a bow.
But I'm surprised that someone doing... any kind of action film influenced by the tribes hasn't included that scene.
What, of cutting the boob off?
Yeah, so Last of the Mohicans type scene. Imagine a scene where someone...
Mark Gibson would do it, wouldn't he?
Be memorable, sort of Reservoir Dogs type thing, yeah, where someone chops off their boob so they can be a better archer.
I suppose the problem would be then faking the single boob look for the rest of the film.
Well, it's a CGI challenge, isn't it? And whichever glamorous Hollywood actress agreed to be pictured not just topless but with one tit would probably get a Golden Globe nomination just for that. And then she could use the award as the other tit.
Anyway, maybe Jeff Bezos thought, what would people with one boob like to order things off to entertain them while they're recuperating from having their boob cut off?
No, he didn't, actually, funny enough.
Maybe he thought, let's cut down some rainforest in the Amazon and use the paper as packaging.
I'll tell you what he thought, Helen. It's a little bit more pedestrian than all of these
Did you
suggestions.
go, I want the website amazing.com, and then he couldn't get it, so he thought Amazon was the closest thing?
Well, possibly, but that's not the official line.
Okay.
The official line is simply that he had the idea of a website selling books, and therefore he wanted one that would come up, bearing in mind this would be marketed to literary types, in alphabetical order first.
Hey.
So this is in the days when people couldn't... There was no Google, so if you wanted to know about a website, you had to read about it in a directory.
And who's like, stuff you, Blackwells, up yours, Hatchards, Waterstones.
Exactly.
And Barnes & Noble thought they had the drop on me.
So he wanted something to begin with an A, and apparently he literally looked through the dictionary and looked at the words beginning with A that he could get.
Oh, he was lucky that Amazon was in there, because that's a proper noun, and a lot of dictionaries don't carry those.
And he came across Amazon, and of course that seemed to fit because he was planning on building the world's biggest bookshop, and of course the Amazon is, well, if it's not the biggest river in the world, it's certainly right up there, isn't it?
It's one of the greats.
It's big.
And he didn't want to call it Yangtze because it's at the wrong end of the alphabet.
But the other thing that I thought might have been part of his design process was that, you know, on the logo, it's got that smiley face arrow thing that points from A to Z. So it's kind of set, and then that's their slogan, isn't it? A to Z and you're done. Mm-hmm. So I thought that logo was part of the original design process, and so he needed a word with an A and a Z in it. But of course that would be kind of too clever for anyone to think up at the initial stage, and in fact that logo was developed later. 2000 the logo came about, but the site was opened in 1995.
What's it?
So actually they had 6 years of really terrible logos. I've seen some of them online and they're hilarious.
Are some of them of the Amazon rainforest and its destruction?
No, although there is a vaguely rivery theme to the original page. Mm-hmm. And actually you can go back and look. I mean, obviously it looks like a sort of terrible teen blog on MySpace now. It's amazing to think that this was the world's biggest book website when it launched.
Yeah, but there wasn't much competition, was there at the time?
No, and everyone had dial-up internet, so just to see that would have taken 10 minutes to load it up.
No, not everyone had dial-up internet.
No, indeed.
Only aristocrats.
Yeah, but what it does say on the text of that first ever Amazon homepage is that you could use their service, the I, as in EYE, rather than I, like the paper.
Yeah.
Which I'd never...
Or I, as in affirmative.
Yeah.
Or I, as in I, Claudius.
Yeah.
Or I...
All of those.
Or none.
Yeah. Or AY, as in Andrew of York, when he signs off his tweets.
Yeah.
Any others?
I have a needle.
So it says...
Potato eye.
You can check their service, the Eye, which I've never heard them reference since. I didn't know that was called the Eye. But obviously it evolved into just the Amazon algorithm. And it still catches me out now when I get a mass email from Amazon and it's advertising our book. Because I always see it for 1 second, I think, oh my God, Amazon have put out a mail shop for Answer Me This products. And then I realise, no, it's because I self-Google so vehemently. And the only things I've bought from Amazon recently have been things that I've written or been involved with.
So Amazon Eye is just the analytical tool they use to sell you things that you are based on other things you like?
That's what it is now.
Yeah.
But in the early days, it was just a recommendation system. I guess you type in the name of a book and it would suggest 3 or 4 other books. It was a bit like that.
We did a really good slow burn jape once. At the time, our friend Keemon was staying in our house, and I knew that he had used my laptop without permission because Amazon was logged in as him, and I wouldn't do that, obviously. And so I put a lot of books about alcoholism in his basket, and so all of his recommendations were about alcoholism. But he didn't seem to clock for about a year.
That is good. That is good.
It was really funny.
I do worry, actually. I've just decided to share Netflix accounts with my parents.
They could completely skew it by watching all of their racy movies.
I know. And so I'm just a bit worried that one day I'm going to go home, turn on my iPad, and it'll say, you've been watching Lacy Ladies in Lingerie. Would you like to watch this? And I'll be like, oh, thanks, Dad. Yeah,
Martin has been retraining our Netflix to recommend a lot of documentaries about suicide.
Portland doing documentaries about suicide. That's what happens on Netflix.
The Bridge is a good one, by the way. If you want to watch a good documentary about suicide, that's been the best one so far.
To keep yourself safe on holiday, make sure you stock up on essentials such as sun cream, money belt and extra thick condoms. You can't be sure where those swarthy locals have been, but with their exotic accents and their strong arms, they'll certainly sweep you off your feet. I don't even know my son's father's name. Cheers.
Answer Me This holiday. Travel the world from the comfort of your own headphones. Out now at answermethispodcast.com/albums.
Here's a question from Lee, who says, as a child, I was told to wash my hands after going to the toilet. Sound advice, isn't it?
Very good.
Yep. And as an adult, it's expected, as it's unhygienic not to. As a gay man, I've had a lot of dicks in my mouth, and I know of people who do a lot worse.
Impossible. What could be worse?
On a On a scale of that, of doing a lot worse, is that more dicks or less?
Fewer dicks, Ollie.
Yeah, sorry, grammar is always important. I am also assuming most adults have either given a blowjob or received one.
I've never got one.
I think that's
so unfair.
I think that's either or though, given or received. Therefore, why is it so important to wash my hands, yet it's accepted when an actual tool is in my mouth?
Well, I think people do expect a certain amount of penile hygiene, don't they? That you might cringe, Lee, if a blatantly unwashed penis started worming its way towards your face.
That's right.
And also...
For you to accept it into your mouth.
Yeah.
You want it to be of a certain level, which you're not applying.
It's only
when
courteous,
you're washing
isn't
hands.
it?
Yeah, and in fact, maybe you'd like to keep in your pocket a little wet wipe just to give it a quick scrubbing before you chow down. Also, a lot of people suggest condom use for oral sex to diminish the chance of orally transmitted disease.
Do you know what? That was a question that I remember specifically I wanted to ask when I was 15 years old in biology class. Did you want to ask that
too.
too?
Yeah, can you get AIDS from
can I get AIDS from someone blowing me off? I wanted to ask, but I couldn't ask that in front of the whole class.
Presumably the most pressing question for you was, will anyone ever give me a blowjob?
Yeah,
I can answer that question.
But I felt embarrassed asking the question.
Yeah, anyway, apparently on the average penis, there are 42 different types of germ, and slightly fewer on a circumcised one, because they gather in damp places like under the foreskin. So just make sure you clean properly there, fellows.
Okay.
How many types of germ are there on the exterior skin of your arm or your nose?
This is, when you get adverts which say there are 5 million types of germs on your toothbrush, and only 50 on your toilet seat. You think, yeah, but which ones are worse?
Yeah, if one of them is like E. coli, then that's more significant than just your average bit of fauna.
Yeah, I'm unlikely to start brushing my teeth with the toilet seat. Just it's been in contact with very different things, right?
Right, well, here's a question about something else that's quite dirty to put in your mouth. It's from Andrea from the gravy-filled north, who says, where is the north-south divide when it comes to gravy on your chips? Why can't southerners understand that it's delicious?
It's not a north-south divide, Andrea. There are a lot of regional variations in favoured chip toppings all around Britain. Not even all northerners favour gravy. Some of them like curry sauce or cheese. And then you get differences in the east and the west.
Well, Canadians have poutine, don't they?
Yeah, but they're far north, aren't they, Martin? In Canada.
That's true, actually, yeah.
I do quite like the idea that you could draw the north-south gravy divide across the whole of the globe and see if it does cut through the USA and Russia as well.
Maybe there is a particular latitudinal point above which gravy on chips is de rigueur. Here's the thing that I wonder, Andrea, whether it's not so much a chips and gravy thing as what goes with the chips, because if you're having fish and chips, gravy doesn't seem like that obvious an accompaniment, but pie and chips it does.
Yeah.
I wonder whether people where Andrea is from prefer a pie.
This may be a completely unfounded cliche, but in my imagination
there is no hesitation.
People in the north who are eating chips in a pub, for example, are probably more likely to be doing so with a warm ale, and I think probably people who are eating chips in the south might be nowadays more likely to be doing it with a cold lager, and I wonder if gravy goes better with ale.
They're virtually the same thing, aren't they?
It's that pub warm thing.
Yeah, but if it's from a chip shop and the drinks are relevant...
But chips and gravy is definitely a wintry thing, isn't it? That's a real, winter warmer.
Well, and actually that's the point,
It's very cold in the north.
It is colder up north.
Here we go.
Helen, it is not objectionable to say it is colder in the north. It is factually colder in the north. It is.
Yeah.
Only by a few degrees. I suppose the big test would be the Midlands, wouldn't it?
Oh, the Midlands is like a swing voter, isn't it?
Well, Martin, Midlands correspondent. Growing up, did you ever encounter gravy on chips there?
Yeah. But we had curry sauce and other stuff as well, so I think, I used to eat mayonnaise too.
But is there a north-south Midlands divide? And she's asking where is the line?
Because, Oxford is very different to, say, Coventry.
I'd argue it's diffusive. There's probably not a point where everybody eats gravy.
Okay, time for a question from Duffy from Northwood, who says, Helen, answer me this. Which came first, tartar sauce or tartar, referring to the crap you get on your teeth?
Well, if you're talking about the substance, then obviously tartar on teeth has been around as long as teeth, because, let's face it, ancient dentistry was not that great.
That's right, and I'm guessing the ancient Greeks and Romans had no real need for tartar sauce.
I think maybe their taste didn't run to tartar sauce.
Although, actually, it's very good, isn't it, with Mediterranean grilled fish?
It's alright, but it's not essential.
Anyway, Duffy continues this ridiculous tract. It seems like tartar on your teeth would have existed and therefore have a name for it for longer, but it would be such bad marketing to then name a sauce after that.
Yeah, but actually they come from different roots.
Yes.
Both the sauce and the tooth muck got the name tartar around the same time, actually, in the early 19th century. But for the teeth, it used to be something called calculus.
What, so you'd have toothpaste adverts saying, cuts down radically on calculus. New calculus-free McLean's. That's hilarious. Although tartar sounds quite posh as well, like ta-ta, like posh people say goodbye.
Well, it does sound quite posh in its long form as well, because the...
Are you going to say me now that it comes from some Latin tartare?
Well, it's from potassium bitartrate.
Right, oh, wow, okay, I didn't guess that.
So that's... so once they stopped calling it calculus, that was the name that stuck.
Cream of tartar is a cooking ingredient, isn't it? It's an acid, so I wonder if it's chemically related.
I think it is, Martin, I think it is.
Right.
You could scrape off your teeth and use it in baking, but don't.
Okay, so both have their root in the chemical table?
No.
Oh.
The other one was named after the Tartars, as in the sort of warring force from the east.
And what's that got to do with mayonnaise you put on fish?
Well, it's a bit indirect, Ollie, because the Tartars gave their name to foods that were spicy, because that's what they were associated with. But then, in the end, when it comes to tartar sauce and steak tartare, it's because they're chopped up. So maybe they liked food that was both spicy and chopped up, but only the chopping up caught on.
So which part of the world are the Tartars from?
The Tartars were the Turco-Mongol people of Central Asia, and they were renowned for their fierceness.
But you couldn't be that fierce if you need to have all your food cut up for you like a baby.
Maybe it's because they used to dice the enemy finely, and then mix them up with capers and gherkins.
Helen? Oliver? Though life is full of questions, there are answers you must know. 1. No, it will not fall off, but moderation in all things too. Yes, there probably is, but we won't find out in our lifetimes. 3, most people prefer Connery, but my personal favorite is Dalton. 4, if you try and slip a 1, it would ruin your friendship.
Here's a question from Cheeky Horse.
You don't often hear of cheeky monkeys, the typical thing, isn't it? But actually horses, people tend not to use the phrase cheeky. I think it's because...
Crazy horse?
Yes, a crazy horse, more likely to buck you in the face and cause some serious damage, isn't it? You don't think, oh, what a cheeky horse, just debilitated me.
I think horses have been quite noble, but crazy, but never cheeky.
Never cheeky.
They're not exactly japesters.
Not really given to levity, are they?
Well, let's see whether this cheeky horse is.
This cheeky horse says, Ollie, answer me this. Why do prominent politicians and the like always announce what they're going to say in important speeches before they give the important speech?
Well, it's not them announcing it, is it? It's their press secretary.
Not only could they save time by just releasing a statement instead, presumably instead of the speech, but there is no shock or surprise in politics anymore. Discuss.
I agree. But I think it's inevitable, isn't it? Because, well, it was.
Was it so that they could make the deadlines of the newspapers?
Yes. Essentially.
Yeah.
No one wants to read in their morning copy of the Daily Telegraph over their eggs and bacon.
Something that happened 2 days ago and they heard about on Radio 4 yesterday.
Exactly.
Right.
What they want to read is, what is the Prime Minister going to say later at this event that I'm not going to hear about again until I watch the 10 o'clock news?
Spoiler alert, but then that does ruin the news for tomorrow, because you're like, yes, he said what we thought he was going to say yesterday.
Yeah. Well, absolutely right. But then, of course, what happens then is the news very quickly becomes opinion about what was said.
Ugh.
So the only time, I guess, because, if you're a press secretary, you want to control the story, the only time you can guarantee that you'll just be able to get the news message out about what David Cameron said is before he's actually said it. Because as soon as he says it, people then discuss it and debate it. But of course, now what's happened is, with the online world, people then have that debate about what he said before he's even said it.
My God, Minority Report.
So from about 10 p.m. the night before a big speech, people already have the headlines from the following day's papers, at which point they start discussing it on Twitter, so that by the time the paper comes out previewing what he's talking about later that day, it already feels like last night's news. And I suppose, in a way, maybe politicians are using this to their advantage a bit, in that they're actually able to gauge public opinion to what they're about to say before they say it. So actually, I seem to remember this being the case around Ed Miliband's speech on immigration. There'd been a big lot of pre-kerfuffle that he was about to say something that sounded more right-wing than you'd expect Labour to sound.
Right.
And this was, the statement where he sort of essentially said, we got it wrong, and, we should have had tighter controls on immigration. And that was leaked way ahead of it happening. And then all the discussion about it from all the angsty left-wingers had already died down by the time he gave it, so that you get the positive press coverage afterwards. I think they kind of use it as a tactic in a way.
So it can be for notifying the press and letting them get their copy in on time, for controlling the story, and also maybe for testing the temperature of what you're going to say and perhaps modifying identifying the actual speech. Is that possible?
Yeah.
So they're all just playing to the gallery then?
Well, but we all know, don't we, that speeches are written and crafted. No one talks in that rhetorical way, do they, in groups of three and with jokes and...
prefacing everything with my fellow Americans.
Yeah. So we know that it's been written and crafted, and in fact, people who have previously been Tony Blair's speechwriter or whatever will turn up on documentaries and that will be their credit. They're quite open about the fact they have writers. So in a way, it's sort of more honest, isn't it? This is what the Prime Minister will say later. No one's pretending that it's a live, spontaneous event.
It does take some of the fun out of it, though. Here's what he's going to say later. Later, you get to see him say it. What's the big deal? Why doesn't he? Why can't you have more teasers?
A bit more improv.
At the end of Mad Men, they'll go, next time on Mad Men. They give you a lot of imagery, but you have no idea what the plot's going to be.
Well, I suppose the other thing, though, is that you will almost always get a camera crew at a speech the Prime Minister is giving. And probably at a speech that the Home Secretary's giving and the Chancellor's giving, even though he's quite boring. But, if you're just Housing Minister or Education Minister, you're not guaranteed that there'll be a camera there because you do a lot of events that aren't going to be interesting.
Yeah, right. So just give out the piece of paper with the speech written on. Don't even bother orating.
No, but the point is, you need to tell the press what's going to be in the speech because there may be press that didn't realise they would be interested in that speech but then realise they can fabricate a story around it if they go along.
Just sounds like a lot of bullshit, really, though.
Well, it is, but that's the news cycle, Helen.
Check out my exciting speech as Minister for Bins. I bet you want to be there later with your cameras when I actually do the thing. They're going to be performing seals and I'm going to do a dance on a bin. It's going to be like Stomp.
I suppose this is why people like Prime Minister's questions, isn't it?
I don't.
Because even though you get all these terribly scripted lines...
They have to be doing a bit of improv, don't they?
Well, at least the leaders don't know what each other is going to say, even though within their own parties they've decided what someone might say. So the fact that they're standing there not knowing what's going to come out of the other one's mouth means you get a certain sense of spontaneity, don't you? But the worst bits of PMQs are the bits where it clearly has been scripted in advance. I don't know if you saw just before they broke up with this whole business about fag packets being labelled. I really thought it was the worst in recent memory.
Right.
Ed Miliband said, "You're now the Prime Minister for Benson and hedge funds." That's piss poor, isn't it?
You wouldn't get that in a cracker, would you?
If the sub-editors at The Sun had to sit around all day trying to come up with puns for tobacco companies, they'd do better than Benson and hedge funds in about 5 minutes. And yet all Labour could come up with that whole day was Benson and hedge funds.
What about you're a mall bellend?
Exactly. That would be better.
You're a silk cunt.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's Answer Me This, listeners. There you go. Yep, another fulfilling half an hour. I'm sure you'll agree.
Yes,
Probably.
I feel.
If you've made it this far, because you could have opted out earlier, couldn't you? No reason. No one's got a gun to your head.
Maybe you fell asleep and you've woken up with this.
Yeah.
Screaming.
Yeah, you've slept through your stop. Wake up now. You're
God.
at Wimbledon.
Is that the most faraway place you could think of? There's nowhere further west than that. That's where the Romans thought they'd fall off the world.
Anyway, we should be back next week with your questions. So send us those. All our contact details are on our website,
AnswerMeThisPodcast.com, whereupon you can also find links to Answer Me This Holiday. And if you're so over-enthused by the Royal Baby, you can listen to the Answer Me This Jubilee for more royal shit. And if you're feeling sporty, then you can listen to Answer Me This Sports Day. We have an album for all your moods because we know you only have 3 states of mind and we can accurately reflect them all.
That's right. And come back next week for the next free episode of Answer Me This. Bye!